All right, we should be good to go and live. Now, for you guys that saw my community post, I actually wasn't going to stream today. I was going to take a little bit of a break today. I actually just got back from like a 1 day trip and then I also had to work, so I'm pretty tired. But I watched the episode and I wanted to talk about it while my thoughts are still fresh because I liked the episode as a whole. I thought it was an 8 out of 10. If I was going to rank the episodes, I'd probably put this one maybe second or third. I don't think it was the best episode. I thought last week's episode was my favorite, but this was definitely a very good episode. But I have questions with the ending and where they kind of left out at that I kind of want to talk to you guys about, because if we look at the trailers, we know that there's going to be a massive time skip between this episode and the next. I think it is mentioned that it is going to be a 10-year gap. So I thought that was a bit interesting, especially where we leave off our characters in this episode. There seems like there's a lot of things that we are just going to get kind of rushed into. So there is that idea that I felt like this episode in and of itself was not rushed, but the ending and trying to get to where we age up our characters again was rushed. But in this stream, I want to go through the positives, my neutrals, and then kind of my negatives. I have a couple negatives, not a lot. I have a couple, like maybe 4 or 5 I have on my notes. But we'll see what happens. I don't know. And as you guys are rewatching this stream, or if you're coming into this stream, what did you guys think of the episode? What did you guys like about it? What did you not like? And all that. Also, farewell to our younger actresses that played both Rhaenyra and Alicent. I think they did a very good job of portraying both the characters, but these will be the last 2 episodes we see of them, unless we get sort of a flashback type scene. But I will say, I think they did a very good job and all of that. So let's get into my overall positives of the show, of this episode specifically. So getting into it, we have my first big positive. We saw a good amount of Rhaenys. All right, so I loved that idea. And Rhaenys, every time she's on screen, I just like her, right? I think she gives off a very wise, and she seems kind of like the smartest character in this show, where we see that Rhaenys is like, Corlys, this is not going to be as easy as maybe you think it's going to be, right? That even because we are marrying Rhaenyra, shit's gonna, hit the fan. But yeah, watching it late, so I'll be back later if you're still on. I probably won't be on too long, Billy Bob, but I'm going to give my little thoughts about it, and you can rewatch it if you would like. But getting into that, so I wanted to say I like that we get to see more Rhaenys. I've been a very big proponent of not seeing Rhaenys in the first 4 episodes, but I really liked that idea. So let's get into my next positive, which is more of a big positive on the entire episode as a whole. I felt like the mood was fantastic. Like, we see King's Landing, it's very dreary, it's raining all the time. It feels very dark. Whereas in past episodes, like, say, the tournament scenes in King's Landing, it felt, very vibrant and very colorful. This episode was very, especially in King's Landing early on in the episode with Alicent, when she's kind of there by herself, they feel very dark. They play on their dark colors a lot more, which I thought was something really nice and was a good touch, right? So I thought the mood was very good. I think they built the tension throughout the episode and really did a good job of that. It's something that I give a lot of criticism to on shows nowadays, is that a lot of shows do not know how to build tension and then keep the tension and then pay it off. Whereas House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones as a whole has usually done that very well. I think they did a pretty good job of it in this episode, because it was kind of building, and it's building more towards the later episodes of the season, but it also is building in this episode as we see kind of a different change from the book. We'll get a little bit later into it, because it is something that I'm like in my middle ground to negative on kind of the ending of the episode, but let's keep going. So I thought pacing and mood was fantastic. So that was something, a very big plus on the episode. Let's move into, I think they handled Criston Cole and Rhaenyra's relationship pretty well, right? Where I feel like both sides, where I think we all thought it was going to be one way or the other, one was going to spurn the other, it was kind of this idea that they kind of both spurned each other, where it was like Criston Cole at this point kind of feels like he has to marry Rhaenyra. It's his only way of getting his honor back, which makes sense and is a pretty good motive for why he would do these things, but it's just very it's not going to happen, right? Rhaenyra wants to be queen. She's going to ascend the Iron Throne and all that stuff. She can't openly like run away and or marry Kristen Cole. It doesn't make any sense. And the way that we see Rhaenyra do this, which I thought was a little interesting, because this was also kind of a change from the Fire and Blood. It's kind of a rumor, more or less, that they're going off of. But the idea that Laenor and Rhaenyra, very, very much from the get-go, were like, we are going to have a, you know, public relationship where people see us and we do our duties to our fathers, but in private we can, you know, have our own stuff. Like, that was one thing that I thought was weird in episode 4, was that Rhaenyra didn't really comment on the idea that Laenor is gay. And in this episode, we see that Rhaenyra is smart. She knows that he is gay, and that's kind of one of the reasons she actually was okay with marrying him, was because she could make this deal and then, you know, continue her like friends with benefits type thing with Kristen Cole. Now, obviously, Kristen Cole is not very happy about this, right? Kristen Cole in this situation is not someone that wants to be like a side hoe, basically, right? If we even look at Eris Oakheart, right, in that whole idea with Arianne, Eris Oakheart wanted more. Like, he didn't want to just sleep with her. He kind of wanted more there. And when you openly tell the other person, yeah, nothing's gonna happen out here, we can just continue on being like friends, or, you know, we can be friends basically, but we can also sleep together type thing. So I thought that was a really good idea. So yeah, Matthew, I wasn't gonna do a stream, but I watched the episode and I wanted to just say my thoughts. I didn't want to wait till tomorrow. I might still do a stream tomorrow anyway, Matthew, but I really wanted to talk about some things, especially towards the end of the episode. The end of the episode, and then looking at the trailer scares me a bit, right? I thought this episode as a whole was very good, but I'm seeing some things, and there's a couple things in the negatives that I want to talk about that do scare me on the future of the show, and that do kind of remind me of the later seasons of Game of Thrones. But we'll get there when we get there. I want to stay on the positive, start out very positive with the stream. So I thought that was a really good idea. And then I think also kind of making Kristen Cole have this moment where he's with Alicent, and Alicent doesn't even know that they had anything together. And it's kind of just, you know, Alicent's kind of hinting at that Rhaenyra slept with Daemon, and just doesn't name drop Daemon. So it's kind of one of those kind of cliches or whatever, but it kind of makes sense. So Kristen Cole basically confesses that he had this with Rhaenyra, and Alicent from now on is basically just, she is full Team Green now, right? I really liked her in this episode, right? And what's weird is, for me, is just because of the way they're making the characters in the show, I really do like Alicent, which is something that was very different in Fire and Blood. In Fire and Blood, I didn't really like Alicent. Like, I thought she was a fine character, but I was just Team Rhaenyra all the way. The way they've used Rhaenyra and the way they've used Alicent has made me feel very sympathetic towards Alicent, because she is in a tough situation. And the reason I'm not full like Team Green, I'm still going to be Team Black and Rhaenyra, but is because Alicent kind of put herself in this situation. Like, yes, she was just following Otto's like orders and stuff like that, but she also didn't help herself. You know, like, she put herself in the situation to, you know, marry the king and all this and all that. So in a way, I feel bad for Alicent, but in the same way, I don't feel bad for Alicent, if that makes sense. This episode was great up until the very last minute. I agree, Matthew. That's kind of how I felt the entire episode. I was like, hey, I really like this. We're getting a lot of Rhaenys. We're getting a lot of good scenes with the introduction of Larys, Clubfoot. So I'll talk about him. He's another one of my positive. I like the way that they introduced him really in a past episode, but I like the way that they made him more of a focal point in this episode, where it was very subtle. It was kind of like it was like a Varys thing, where it's like, well, Alicent, this is weird because, you know, I saw Maester Mellos giving Rhaenyra tea. I wonder why that would happen. I mean, I guess Rhaenyra is having some issues. And I like the way that we see him manipulating the game, right? And I do enjoy that. Matthew says, I'm slowly starting to shift to Team Green as well. I wouldn't say I'm shifting to Team Green because I'm still going to be Team Black. It really doesn't matter what happens with Rhaenyra. Me knowing what characters are on what side, I will be on Team Black. But I am a bit more sympathetic and understanding of the Greens' position in the show than I was in Fire and Blood. In Fire and Blood, I was very much against Team Green and a lot of their actions leading up to the Dance of the Dragons and even early on in the Dance of the Dragons. So it'll be interesting to see what people really think about both factions, because especially as this show goes on, with how they've kind of painted the blacks and the greens kind of on equal ground, really, it's something that's going to make the later parts of the show very interesting. But yeah, so I really like the way Clubfoot was introduced, how he's kind of slowly getting influence and power, and how he's like, he very much already seems like a Varys Littlefinger character, where he's like, soon the Hightowers are going to be going to war soon. So I thought that was really good. Just speaking on that as well, Alicent's scene when she comes into the wedding, I thought was one of my favorite scenes of this episode, where Viserys has this speech and it gets interrupted because Alicent just walks in with the green dress, and this is kind of the first time we see her acting like a queen, right? Where she has the Cersei moments where she walks into a room and people just are like in awe of her, right? And I really liked that for Alicent's character. You know, you see where she's coming from now. She's like, it's kind of foreshadowed with how Otto starts the episode, where Otto Hightower is kind of like to Alicent, who are you going to be? You are kind of on your own now, right? And you're either going to have to trust Rhaenyra that she's not going to kill your children and stuff when she comes to the throne, and that she's going to be a good friend, or you're going to have to get Rhaenyra off the throne. You're going to have to put Aegon on the throne. And by the end of this episode, I think she's fully committed now to the Hightowers and the Greens as a whole. But there's one idea that I want to talk about in the negatives that bothers me on one specific detail, but we'll get there when we get there. Moving on, what else do we have on here? I thought Laena and Daemon's meeting, I guess, how they start to interact and how their relationship starts to develop, I thought was good. I thought, I will talk about this later on, I felt like it was, a little rushed, but I thought that was good. And yeah, so just a little tiny scene I wanted to talk about, but I thought that was pretty good. Let me get some stuff off my glasses. I could tell I had a hair on my left thing. By the way, for any of you United States folk that rewatch this or in the stream, I went to Nashville, Tennessee for a single day, and I'm not a fan of that city. The Velaryons as a whole, I thought were pretty good in this episode. I liked Laenor in the episode. I can feel like he is given much more of a character, and this is what I've said about a lot of characters in the show, where they get a bit more of a character, right? Where Laenor, it's even addressed, right, where we had the whole idea again that you don't really choose who you love. It's something that like you're kind of born with, like, Blizzy playing on that idea with Laenor. And it's interesting to see how Laenor and Rhaenyra's relationship develops, right? And I really liked seeing more of the Velaryons. They're just a badass house. This is where they're at their most prominent. And I feel like that's something I've really not liked from the show as a whole, as we haven't really seen them in all of their splendor and glory. And we see a bit more of that, right? So they're coming to the wedding, and we see their ships, we see the dragons. Something I'll get to in a second about the dragons, but I didn't think they looked the best in this episode. But I liked them in this episode as well. I think another great scene. I think one of the better scenes, because this is something George R. R. Martin talks a lot about, especially in his works, is the idea of legacy. Like, what do we leave behind when we die? And Viserys is kind of talking to Lord Strong, who has now been made the Hand, that how will they remember me? Was I a good king? Was I an okay king? Someone that really won't be remembered? There is a lot of that in there, right, that I thought was very good, and I thought it was a really good speech. And Viserys is always good in this episode. We see his declining in health. I think they handled that pretty well. Again, Viserys, and it's a continued theme, not being decisive with what his like ailment is, and continuously going to the leeches when it has not helped at really any point. Like, it's just continued to spread on his body. So I thought that was interesting. And it kind of feeds that idea that Maester Mellos definitely is up to something. Because you look at this idea that, oh, the leeches are helping him, and straight up says no to other types of medicines like herbal medicine for the king. It's a little sus, just to say the least. So I thought that was a good little wink there. And I think Mellos himself is the one that is corrupt. I don't think the Mages as a whole in this series are corrupt, even though we really haven't seen any other ones besides Mellos. But he is definitely, like, it's just the way that his scenes are portrayed. He's definitely corrupt to a degree. So, thought that scene was very good with Viserys. I like that we see a little bit more Harwin. I think we need more of him, just based upon where the trailers go. Like, when we have the next time skip, Rhaenyra is going to have children already. Like, and I'm not talking like babies. Like, they're going to be, like, grown up a little, okay? So, we get a little bit of Harwin, but I feel like we maybe need a little bit more just with how they're going with the next, like, episode. But I did like that we at least get to see more of him in this episode. I really liked the wedding as well, where the wedding seemed like an actual wedding. Whereas I see a lot of shows, they'll have a wedding type thing, and this is a feast. This isn't the actual wedding. And we don't see all these characters interacting. It just feels like it's just our only main characters. Like, all the characters kind of get around a little, which I thought was cool. Alicent goes to see her uncle. We see Daemon kind of making his rounds. We see Laenor and Joffrey interacting. It just seems like we had a lot going on at this wedding feast, and I really liked that attention to detail. And I feel like it was paced really, really well with how we see Criston Cole having lingering looks at Rhaenyra and Laenor, which kind of builds up his anger and kind of where he's at as a character. And I liked a lot of that going on, so I wanted to give a major shout out to the writers on that. I think that was really good. I felt like we needed a dance in there with Lena and Daemon. We kind of got like a half dance type thing. I thought we were going to get more on the idea, like if they were going to make this shift and all that we were going to see Daemon maybe interact with Lena a bit and then maybe like bring it up to Corlys, or maybe Corlys like it looks at this and sees like a potential for another alliance here. That's what I thought we were going to get, because it kind of feels like if we're going to go into the next episode and they're already going to be married, it's going to feel like a big jump. Like, how did we get here? Corlys Velaryon is a very powerful guy. Like, did they have a conversation? That's where I have a lot of my issues with the next episode, is like they have so many things they're going to have to explain. Like, why did this happen? How did this happen? That I'm a bit worried about the next episode. This episode definitely made me feel like there was a grand Maester conspiracy between Mellos and Otto saying the king was going to die. Yeah, and that's the problem here, is that there seems like there's this idea that Mellos is basically making the king die, right? Which is really weird. And the way that Mellos brings the tea to Rhaenyra, which again, we don't have confirmation that Viserys actually did this. And then we find out that the Clubfoot knows about this. Seems awfully weird, right? Like, there seems like there's something else going on here. So I will say, I think the Maesters are very, or at least Mellos is very suspicious at the least. Anything else I wanted to talk about on the episode 5 on the positives? I will say also think Joffrey and Laenor's relationship was really good. Spoilers, it gets cut short. I wish we would have gotten to see a bit more, even though I knew what Joffrey's fate was going to be. I just wished we had seen maybe more of them in the episodes prior, where it was kind of like maybe Loras and Renly, where we don't really see them together really outside of like, well, okay. Season 1, we see them a bit, right? And we kind of see like more of their relationship building up. So like when one of them dies, it's a bit more of a gut punch. They didn't really do that. So Joffrey's kind of death at the end of this episode, it almost rings hollow, because this is a character that really were introduced at the beginning of the episode. I know he has kind of been in the other episodes, like we've seen him, but this is kind of the first time he's actually been a character, really, and they kill him off that quickly. His death didn't mean much, right? Compared to in Fire and Blood, when he has his death, it means a lot more. So that was kind of a positive and a negative there. Moving on, we also had this idea that I have a couple in the middle ground, and they're gonna basically depend on kind of the next episode where it goes. But let's talk about middle ground. I had Melees and Sea Smoke. So these are the dragons we see from the Velaryons. This is Rhaenys' dragon and then Laenar's dragon. They looked a bit weird. I thought the dragons did not look as good as they have in past episodes, so that's just something I wanted to note. I just thought it was weird. Another thing I thought was weird, the way Alicent instantly believes Larys Strong about the tea. She doesn't really double check this with anyone. Like, yes, we get the Criston Cole thing, but at this point, she like doesn't really question Larys Strong at all. She just kind of instantly is like, oh shit, that's definitely what happened, and then just tries to confirm it with Criston Cole. So that was an idea that I thought was very odd, that the way, especially with how close we've seen them be in the past episode, that seems really weird to me, but whatever. And then Alicent and Rhaenyra never talk about lying to her. So I have this in middle ground because I see why they didn't do it. It builds tension between Alicent and Rhaenyra more than a confrontation. And also, it didn't feel like we really had time for it in this episode, right? I felt like it would be something they would have done in probably the next episode. Or it was going to be something at the very end we would have gotten, which would have made a bit more sense than having like the marriage at the end and all that. But that is kind of a disappointment for me, because if we're going to get a 10-year like skip in the next episode, we're never going to get that talk, right? Like, or is Rhaenyra really going to ever figure out that Alicent knows about, like, it's a concept that's kind of just left up in the air right now. That's why it's in middle ground, where I'm going to have to kind of wait until the next episode to see how I feel about that idea. Let's see what you guys are saying in chat real quick. Criston Cole going crazy when beating Joffrey was really chilling. Great acting by Fabian. Alicent also, yeah. So Alicent's walking into the throne scene, like I've talked about in the stream, was one of the best scenes in the episode, in my opinion. I also thought that really great acting from most of the characters in the episode. By the way, I think they did a very good job. And then Criston Cole going crazy, I thought that was really good. But I think I'm going to talk about something that's related to that I'm going to have in the negative. But yes, I did think that was a good scene, more or less. So the next idea, major spoiler again. I mean, we've been kind of going through all spoilers, but a major spoiler here. How are they going to handle Criston Cole killing a quote unquote, basically? Because as an audience, we kind of know what was going on between Joffrey and also Criston Cole. But how are they going to handle that Criston Cole basically killed an innocent dude that is very close to Laenor? Like, because from the outside point of view here, Criston Cole just beat the shit out of Joffrey for pretty much no reason. So, how are they going to handle that in the next episode? That's something I want to see what they do. That's why it's a middle ground. Because I don't know how they're going to handle it. And I'm interested to see where that kind of goes, right? Because Alicent stops Criston Cole from, killing himself. So maybe Alicent kind of manipulates Viserys. But again, it's a middle ground because we don't know yet. So it's going to be somewhere in the middle. My next idea, and this is a big one, right? This is something that could really be a big negative in next episode, is how are they going to handle Rhaenyra's kids? Because there was a theory that maybe they were actually going to be Criston's. Maybe we were going to get a little bit more Criston Cole action, and that's how maybe her first 3 kids were going to happen. But it's not that going to be that way, which I figured it wasn't going to be. So the idea here is going to be, well, does she shack up with Harwin off screen? Because all of these children don't look like Laenor or Rhaenyra, right? We've seen them in the trailer. So how are they going to explain this? Right, so that's a big idea. And it's also a big moment that isn't even going to be on screen. Unless we get a flashback or we get something to explain it. That's why it's a middle ground. I don't know how they're going to handle that yet. So I can't put it as a negative or a positive yet because I'm not sure where they're going to go with it. A lot of these ideas, they've really gone away from the books, in my opinion. I haven't gotten to the dance yet in Fire and Blood. Is that actually how he dies in the story? No, that's not how he dies in the story. It's similar, but it's not. What ends up happening in the book is that there is a tournament, and Criston Cole is participating in it, and Joffrey is basically the champion for Laenor. And also we have Harwin is in this as well. Harwin is the champion for Rhaenyra. And what ends up happening is that Kristen Cole takes a mace and basically kills Joffrey. It's under some very questionable terms, but that is basically what happens. It does not happen but it is during the same time period, though. It is during like the wedding feast. Like when Viserys says we're gonna have tournaments and stuff in this 7-day period, one of the tournaments, that is what happens. Melee's was too small. I kind of agree. I just think Melee's looked weird. So those are my middle grounds. I can't consider those negatives yet that I talked about, but they have a very big possibility they could be negatives, just depending on how they handle it. So these are my negatives. I have about 4 negatives here that I just didn't really understand why they did this, right? So continued Daemon is bad guy, and also he teleports in this episode. So we see Daemon at the beginning of the episode, and he basically kills his bronze bitch, which I kind of feel like we all saw coming to a degree, but the way it happened just was so weird. Like, Daemon just knows where she is, and then I don't know, it felt really weird the way Daemon and the bronze bitch, like, how that happens. It felt weird to me. And then to go from that to then, oh, he just randomly shows up at the wedding, feels very weird. It feels like Varys in like season 6, where he just shows up with the Martells and Tyrells at the end of the season. I don't know. And I just like, they continue to make Daemon this just a straight up villain. Like, he's not even morally gray anymore at this point. He's just a villain. Like, the dude's straight up killing people. He's trying to sleep with his relatives. Like, he's not the Daemon of Fire and Blood anymore, which I think is a really big missed opportunity. He's just a villain now. Like, he's not morally gray. Like you can't, like, you can say, oh, well, he wants attention, he wants power, he wants this. He's a villain. If I'm going to say Otto Hightower's a villain, even though he is morally gray, Daemon is a villain. Like, it makes me feel like they are scared to go an episode without Daemon, which to me doesn't make any sense. I know why Daemon was in this episode, because they needed to have the whole Velaryon, like where he marries Laena, happen. But he didn't need to be in King's Landing. Like, you could have found a better way. And this is what I'm saying is, I feel like episode 6, we should have had another episode where we develop Alicent and Rhaenyra's relationship. We can have the Harwin relationship with Rhaenyra. There's so many things that I felt like they rushed. And Daemon, I think, is one of the characters that is getting the bad side of that stick. Let's see what you guys are saying in here as well. I agree. I think they time jumped too early. Too much stuff happened, especially after an ending like this. Agreed. I like the grandeur and majestic feeling of the royal feast and dance. Yeah, I thought they did a very good job. I thought the cinematography was very good. The music was very good. I really liked that section of the episode. I thought it felt like what a wedding feast would feel like, in my opinion. I believe so, because in the episode preview, Harwin and Kristen Cole are fighting, I presume, over Rhaenyra, but with the time jump, I don't know how that's going to be really handled with that. Yeah, and that's my thing, is this time jump is very questionable. Because depending on how they handle it, it could be a really bad episode next week. It depends on how they explain things. Depends if we kind of have like an opening montage scene where it's like, this character did this. This is what happened here. You know, like, if they just started up and they're just like, well, Daemon's married to this woman now. Rhaenyra's married, or is fucking this dude and has all his kids. But everybody thinks they're Laenors, and it's just going to be like, okay. We could have explained a lot of this in another episode with the younger actor or actresses. But, yeah. All I'm going to say is, why is Daemon complaining about his wife? It's just the problem. It's just the problem of they got a good-looking actress. I wish we got more of the bronze bitch, but I didn't mind him killing her because, like you said, yeah, I know, but it just felt like every opportunity they give Daemon to have some character development and continue his morally gray section of it, they just cut it off. right? And because they want to get him back to King's Landing because they're scared of not having their villain be in the main plot. Like, we see him go to this, we see him go off to war. Okay, they pull him back within an episode. Okay, which again, I've made my thoughts very clear. I don't like the way that episode was handled. Right? I don't even remember what episode that was. I think it was like episode 3. I'm not sure. I think it's episode 3. But that was, I don't know, I didn't like that episode. This episode, they could have had like 2 different storylines going on. You could have had the Daemon storyline where eventually, yeah, let's say he kills his wife, right? But it could have been a little bit more developed. We could have been more of a gray morality type situation, or it could have been where it's like we just get more development for her character, so her death means a bit more, right? Because her death's almost comical at the beginning, right? So I didn't like that element of it, and it's something that I want to lead into the next idea, which this episode made the world feel really small, which is something Game of Thrones really never did until the later seasons. But the world felt so small in this episode, right? Because and this show as a whole has kind of made the world feel really small, which is something that I think is going to get better as the show goes on, just based upon how the story goes. But so far, I mean, anytime we see a character leave King's Landing, they're instantly back. Like, it feels like the only place anything is happening is King's Landing, which, is true to a degree, right? But this episode just, to me, made Westeros and Essos, it made the world feel so tiny, right? We only have a couple houses that are even at the wedding feast, like the Hightowers and, the Lannisters. It just, I don't know, it really didn't feel right to me. But I don't know, hopefully they improve that in the coming episodes. Daemon being at the wedding sure added the tension, which I loved about that is you could just feel something bad is gonna happen, but didn't like Gerald's conversation with Daemon seemed pretty weak. Agreed. That's the problem though. It's like I just don't think Daemon needed to be there. Right? Because we already have the tension. Alicent and Rhaenyra is the big tension, right? They just put more on it when they put Daemon in there, right? And they just didn't need it. You already have the tension there. The tension was built there. Daemon, really, if you think about it, doesn't add anything to what the big, like, brawl is. He's not really, it's really like if Viserys is looking at him, but he's not really involved with it, right? So that whole idea there is that Daemon does add more tension. That's because they've made him a villain, right? So anytime you see him somewhere, okay, shit's about to hit the fan. But they didn't need to. He just didn't need to be there, right? Outside of them trying to rush the relationship we're going to see in the next episode. So that kind of leads me to Joffrey's death kind of felt rushed. And I personally wish we would have seen more of him. And I kind of talked about maybe like seeing Joffrey in more episodes in the past, but because he dies so quickly, and this is a problem with this episode, even though I still gave it an 8 out of 10, I think it's a very good episode, is that we really don't see Joffrey much, and he just kind of dies, right? Like, it makes sense that he dies here because, again, he's kind of taunting Criston Cole. Criston Cole's already pissed off. It makes sense why Criston Cole kills him, but it did feel like if we had seen more of this character, maybe the death would have hit a bit harder. But it's a minor negative. It's like a nitpick negative. That one's like, I don't have a big problem with it. It's just a nitpick negative there. So again, I have no problems if you were cool with that. Now, the instant marriage at the end really bothered me. It really bothered me. Why would you have a wedding when someone very close to Laenor, even if you don't think like they had a relationship or anything, like they were just friends, could you imagine trying to get married after your best friend just got killed? Like, imagine you're at your wedding feast, your friend literally gets beaten to death, his blood is still on the floor, and they're like, yeah, you should wed now. What? That was a weird decision. Really weird decision. It's because, again, they had to rush them getting wedded together, but oh, it just was so weird. It was wrong. I just was not a fan of that whole idea there. Let me know what you guys think about kind of the little small insta wedding at the end. It just was, yeah, I don't know. Just wasn't a fan of that. This is something that I really have a problem with. Like, there's like two of them on here where it's like Damon and now this one that I think are very big problems for me. There was no real development between Alicent and Rhaenyra in this episode before the time skip. It's really like Alicent finds out information which kind of pushes her away from Rhaenyra, but at the same time, Rhaenyra doesn't know that Alicent knows any of this, and she still thinks they're friends. But we're going to have a 10-year gap. So are you going to tell me that when we start this 10-year gap, they're going to be at each other's throats already? Or has Alicent been holding all this in for 10 years? What is going on there? I think it makes way more sense that you end off this episode like the wedding happens, whatever, and Alicent kind of confronts Rhaenyra saying, you know, I know you lied to me and all this stuff, and basically telling her off and beginning that their relationship is over, leading that into the time skip into next episode. So when we see in the episode next week that they don't like each other, they're going against each other, they hate each other's guts, it makes more sense, right? And that's something that's just, it's such a simple thing to do that just, it really bothered me that we did not see that in this episode. That's why I was so confused at the end. Rhaenyra and Laenor gets married at the end after all that's happened, especially after Joffrey's death. Viserys just, yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. We don't get any sense. There's no explanation as to why Viserys is just like, hey, let's do it. Maybe it's because of his health. We saw in this episode that Viserys' health was not good. He had blood coming out of his mouth. Maybe he's fearing he's going to die relatively soon, but we know that's not going to happen. We know Viserys is going to live, you know, at least 10 more years, right? So how is this going to work? Right? There's a lot of questions I'm left with this episode, because this episode as a whole, right? As a standalone episode, and if you're not looking at the future, this is a good episode, right? Like I've talked about, there's a lot of great scenes in this episode that build relationships, build characters, and progress the plot, which is something Rings of Power does really badly. They don't know how to progress the plot, and they're really bad at making likable characters or complex characters. House of the Dragon does a very good job of that, but they left this episode with such a questionable ending, because there's so many questions going into the next episode. The next episode is, in my opinion, the most important episode so far. Because, like I've talked about, if they do this time skip wrong, it will turn off a lot of fans to the show. Because it will not feel earned. And that's the problem. Because we know where they're trying to go. They're trying to get to the major events of the Dance of the Dragon, or at least the starting events by the end of the season. It's pretty obvious. And the problem is when you do that, when you speed up and you skip or you change book material and you just fly past things, you come into some issues, right? You come into issues. We've seen this with Game of Thrones. We've seen this with Rings of Power already. We've seen this through, hell, Star Wars, right? Star Wars is not very good at, like, continuity within their own universe. That too bugged me. Didn't Viserys demand the fight to stop? That is Matthew, that is exactly what I was thinking when the scene happened. I was like, Viserys, are you going to say... Maybe they're playing on the idea that Viserys is... He's not that guy, right? Viserys is not the guy where he's like, I'm going to take charge here and be very decisive. But I just don't... I don't understand the idea. Like, to me, it's another case of, like, the Daemon in the Stepstones episode, where I liked everything leading up to, like, the last 5 to 10 minutes. but it's just not as bad. Like, it's not as bad where I'm like, oh, okay, Daemon has obvious plot armor. This has no tension at all. Agreed. And this is what I'm saying, Norborough, is that it's a very simple thing to fix, right? Show us a scene of, okay, Rhaenyra doesn't have any companionship. Laenor is not going to sleep with her. Show her going to Harwin, right? To build up the relationship a little. Show that, okay, this is why this is going to happen. Have a scene with Rhaenyra and Alicent where they kind of go at each other, like, verbally, and their relationship is over by the end of the like little mini episode. And kind of explain some things with Daemon and Viserys, and there you go. Right? And that's all you need. That's all you need for your time skip. But the problem is that I just don't think they're going to do that. Right? Like, I'm just interested to see where that goes. It looks like we're going back to the Stepstones, though. I know we're going back to the Stepstones, but the thing is, Matthew, they've already ruined the Stepstones. Like, because now here's what I'm expecting out of the Stepstones. Stepstones to me is going to be something where they are going to use it to have Daemon do something for an episode just to keep him in the spotlight. I don't know. I agree, Norbro. I think everything visually looked very good in this episode. I think actors did a very good job portraying everything. Don't know how fleshed out it's gonna. Yeah, agreed. I don't know. And the other thing is, we know another thing's going to happen. So, without going too far into details, we know someone else is going to die soon, or not soon, but at some point that's going to cause another idea. But I don't know. It just feels like everything is being sped ahead. Because, Matthew, the issue is, I think they see that, okay, certain characters that then seem major now are not major in the future, right? So a character like Laenor, for instance, he's a very big character now, but he might not be as important later on. So why waste time developing his character and all that stuff? Yeah, I don't know. I am also ready to see Vhagar Ken Robinson. I am excited to see Vhagar. Ken, what did you think of the episode? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? What rating would you give it? I'm curious because I genuinely think this was a good episode, but I think the ending and the question marks it leaves for the rest of the show kind of drags it down a little for me. But I don't know. I still came out of it. I really enjoyed it for the most part. And I'm going to go through my notes, make sure I talked about everything I wanted to talk about, but that'll probably be the ending of the stream. I just wanted to do a little bit of a talking point, and get my thoughts out already. If you ask me, I feel like they could have gotten away with doing the time jump maybe in episode 9 or even season 2. I agree, Matthew. But the problem is they don't want to do that, right? They don't want to have the high moments be in season 2, because the whole idea here, and this is because they're pressured, is they need to make the series a big hit and have those big twists and turns by the end of season 1 to hook people into season 2. So if you wait to have the start of the Dance of the Dragons and all that stuff be in season 2, you know, like, it's tough to sell that to, like, HBO, for instance, right? So I get why they did it. Like, if if we see how Viserys is dying, right, you could literally have him die at the very end of the season, and it would make sense. Like, you don't need some of the things that are going to happen after, in season 1, but it's probably going that way. But yeah, I think that is going to be all for the stream. I just wanted to do a little quick run through the episode. I might be live tomorrow. I might not. It depends on school and all that stuff if I have time. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I know it was a late stream, so thank you guys for bearing with me. And I will see you guys all in the next stream. Got some good videos to do. And I have a very interesting video as well talking about the blacks and the greens. We talked about it a little bit in the stream today about kind of who is right between the two. So I think this is a good time to kind of do it. What really bugs me even more is we didn't even get a proper wedding with Rhaenyra and Laenor. Yeah, so it bothered me. It's like we had there's so many important weddings in this time period, and I was expecting we were at least going to get a cool, like, you know how Robb and Talisa have a really kind of cool wedding that's kind of cut, and then the dialogue and the music's really good in the show. I thought we were going to at least get something like that, or a Joffrey and Marjorie type ceremony, like, you know, like that's something that like you can't take away from Game of Thrones. They had really good wedding scenes. Like, they had really good, like, Tom and Marjorie getting married. Like, it was always really good. Like, even Edmure, his wedding at the Red Wedding, like, before all the shit happens, it was nice, you know? It was good. It was nice. But, you know, we can't get what we want. But, yeah. All right. I will see you guys all in the next